Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Whalen. I'm the Associate Director of Communications in the Division of Marketing and Communications. My preferred pronouns are she and her, and I'm so happy to be here today to moderate this town hall with SSHRC. Before we get to the Q&A portion of today's event, I'd like to ask our president, Dr. Vianne Timmons, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Megan. I am so pleased to be here with all of you today. I'm just going to pull up my notes because they disappeared from me, unfortunately. But I just want to welcome Ted Hewitt and say how important this SSHRC meeting is. And I'll tell you, as a SSHRC scholar and a CIHR scholar, I know the work it takes to get these grants and how challenging it is. But I also know the benefit of being one of Tri-Council funded. So I think it's really important that I mention that. I want to begin by acknowledging that the lands which Memorial University's campuses are situated in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge with respect the histories, cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. And we encourage everyone to reflect on these lands from where you are located and the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territory. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers. Again, thank you everyone for being here. Delighted Dr. Ted Hewitt, President of SSHRC, is joining us for a town hall with our research community. Looks like we have about 35 people signed up and we anticipate more coming on. You know, it's a great day to have this conversation because on February 11th, it's the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And SSHRC is one of Memorial's most valued national funding partners. Through its long-standing support, our researchers undertake innovative research and scholarship about the world around us. And this town hall will allow our researchers, our staff, and community to connect with TED to learn more about SSHRC and its initiatives. TED will also have a chance to hear directly from you, our participants. Also to learn how the pandemic, especially today, everyone, we know how the pandemic has impacted our researchers and their activities, and to get a better understanding of the priorities of Memorial researchers. I will mention, Ted, that we do know for women, it has been, the pandemic has had even a more adverse effect. And so that's something I want to mention, that we do understand that and are aware of that. So everyone, thank Ted for coming. Stay safe, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Neil Bowes, our Vice President Research, for a few words. Neil.
Thank you, Vianne. My preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. Memorial is incredibly proud SSHRC is hosting this conversation today, because it's been over 4 decades that our teams of multidisciplinary researchers right across the disciplines have benefited directly from SSHRC support. And these investments have played a vital role in enhancing Memorial's global profile as a cutting-edge research leader. We look forward to continuing that strong relationship with the SSHRC in the years to come. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ted Hewitt. He was appointed the president of the SSHRC in March 2015. Before, he was the Vice President, Research and International Relations at Western University in Ontario from 2004 to 2011, where he had been a professor of sociology since 1989. A leading authority on Brazil, Ted has published in monographs, edited works, and a range of academic journals. His current research focuses on national and international innovation systems, with emphasis on the roles of universities, industry, and government in promoting economic prosperity in Latin America and beyond. Ted holds a PhD in sociology from McMaster University. I'm now happy to turn the proceedings over to our special guest, Ted.
Thank you, Neil, for that kind introduction, Megan, Vianne. Great to be back at Memorial again. I try and get there quite often. I think this is my 3rd visit at least. Just sorry I can't be there in person to see you all, because I do very much enjoy that aspect of the the trip to be able to interact, visit your research facilities and projects, and just chat informally. So we'll try and get to that as best we can today. I'm going to talk for maybe 10 minutes or so, some brief updates on what we're doing at SSHRC and how things are going. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A piece. I'm pretty sure we'll be able to answer all your questions. If there are things that I'm not able to answer in sufficient detail, we'll make sure that we get back to you probably through Neil with those answers as quickly as we can. So never fear. And my senior advisor, Darlene Mall, is somewhere online with us, so she's going to be taking notes as well. So you can be assured that we're going to be paying lots of attention. So let me start with a brief update as I can on things that are going on with SSHRC. Vianne, you talked about how the pandemic has affected you in Newfoundland. I mean, for us in Ottawa, certainly very similar. Most of our staff are still working from home, about 95%, but our business is continuing. Our competitions continue to roll out. We've had some delays in some programming, but we've managed to keep going. Overall, we've tried our best to be flexible. So if you have grants, they've all been extended. If you owe reports, that's all been extended, and to try and do the best we can to make sure that your particular situation and your challenges are being accommodated. We've also had some special calls dealing specifically with COVID and COVID-related issues that I'm sure some faculty have been involved in one way or the other. In terms of the agency itself, I mean, we're in good financial health. We had a significant increase, as you may know, from budget 2018. That's still coming in to play. We fund both students, postdocs, and research projects, as you know. We've been very fortunate through some changes we made in recent years and with this additional funding to push our success rates up very significantly. And I'm sure you've benefited from that over the last 3 years or so in terms of your own performance at Memorial. It's always good to see additional colleagues applying, and certainly good to see more and more being funded. It's our goal really to fund at least 30 to 35% of all of our faculty. So we have been, way down there for years, 18% success rates running under 20%. That's changed completely now. Success rates are running 40 to 50% for most programs. The percentage of faculty that we fund one way or another at any one time is running, as I said, well over 30%, heading towards 35%. And we think that's critically important to try and support the work that you're doing. We have a significant interest and engagement on issues related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. As you'll know, the work we did in leading change through the Canada Research Chairs program, Vianne will certainly be well aware, has made a huge difference in how the cohort of CRCs look today. We expect by 2030, with the new measures that we put in place, as the PM has said, the CRCs are going to look a lot more like Canada than they do now in terms of representation from 4 designated groups and well beyond. We have specific initiatives to address anti-Black racism that I'm happy to talk about. And on the Indigenous side, we've done, I think, great things with our partners in Indigenous communities across Canada. We have our setting new directions strategy with the other granting councils that we're going to start to roll out this spring. Our new director of Indigenous strategy, Nicole Paul, is on the file. Some of this will involve policy changes on how we manage and adjudicate applications. Some will involve new funding for programming. But as you know, and hopefully do know at SSHRC, we've had a strategy around Indigenous research for quite some time, several years now. And we've said, flat out, no applications dealing with Indigenous issues that don't involve Indigenous partners. The by and with model has been in place for some time now. We will always use Indigenous peer reviewers for Indigenous research projects. And we have always said as well that Indigenous ways of knowing will always be accepted as legitimate forms of data for further analysis and so forth. So we're really committed now to move with the other councils and to get this new strategy in place, which helps fulfill our obligations under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Call to Action 65, in which we are specifically named as SSHRC. So we're very proud to be doing that. We have a new strategic plan, almost done. We have a new strategic plan called Momentum. If you get a chance, please have a look. It's going to get us through the pandemic and now a bit beyond. So we're really pleased to be working together to move that forward. And I think I'm going to stop there because I know there's going to be lots of questions. There's lots of stuff I didn't touch on. I know that, but I'm sure we're going to get to it in the course of the discussion over the next hour or so. So Neil, I'm going to turn it back to you, and I'm happy to hear from colleagues. I mean, this is what it's all about.
Actually, I'm going to hop in here so I can let our audience know how they can submit questions today. I do have some that were submitted by email, but there are 2 other ways for you to participate. You can use the Q&A function that you see on your screen to type your question, and I will relay it to our panelists. An important note there, though, the questions are limited at 250 characters, so please try to keep them brief. If they go longer than that, they won't get submitted. And if you break it over 2 messages, it's really hard for me to follow because other messages are coming in at the same time, so please don't do that to me. But the other thing you could do is you can let me know, again in the Q&A function, that you'd like to come on screen yourself, turn on your camera and microphone so that you can talk to Dr. Hewitt, Dr. Timmons, and Dr. Bose directly. And we're happy to make that happen. Just let me know that that's what you'd like to do. I'd also like to ask our panelists to try to keep their answers brief while still answering the question, of course, just so that we can get to as many questions as possible. And one final note before we start, in the last number of town halls that I've moderated, I've seen a pile of questions come in at the very last minute that we just don't have time to get to. So if you do have something that's on your mind, put it in early, and that increases the chances that we'll be able to answer your question today. So I'd like to begin by asking Darcy to bring Dr. Tana Allen on screen. Dr. Allen is the Associate Dean of Research with the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and she's also the SSHRC leader for Memorial. Okay. And when you see your video button turn from gray to black, you'll be able to turn on your mic and your camera, Dr. Allen. Here you are. Great.
Tana.
Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for those comments, Dr. Hewitt. My name is Tana Allen. As Megan just introduced me, I'm the Associate Dean Research in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I became the SSHRC leader last fall. As SSHRC leader, for those of you who don't know what that is, I serve as the communication channel between Memorial and SSHRC, and I aim to ensure that the research community at Memorial is aware of new policy and program developments at SSHRC, as well as to provide a way to offer input into the development of SSHRC policies and programs. In other words, it's a two-way street. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or concerns at any time, and keep your eyes open for updates from me over the coming months. I look forward to getting acquainted with our broad research community at Memorial. We all know these are challenging times. The ongoing pandemic, of course, the current situation in St. John's, the brewing snowstorm outside our windows at the moment. Nonetheless, I'm delighted to see so many of us here today as we continue to be engaged in our research and in our community. And that includes researchers, research offices, GFOs, and lots of other people as well. The work we do is important. And as Dr. Bose indicated a few moments ago, the support of SSHRC together with other Tri-Council agencies goes a long way to enabling ways forward. I hope that, I won't say much more, and I hope that today's town hall session will give us an opportunity to explore and discuss priorities and challenges. With that, I'll kick off the Q&A session with a question for Dr. Hewitt. So Memorial University, as many of us know, has been actively engaged in ongoing discussions around EDI at all levels. Of course, SSHRC has been as well. And I wondered if you could address the ways that SSHRC envisions the possibility of new EDI requirements on SSHRC grant applications. And for example, NSERC, of course, has a mandatory question on its Discover grants that specifically asks how EDI concerns were integrated into both project design and team makeup. Is SSHRC considering a similar approach?
A question, Tana. I'm going to talk about some things that we're doing now and some things that will likely evolve from that. I did mention the Canada Research Chairs program, which we which we manage, and the work that's been done there, which has been, I would say, quite successful in addressing issues related to EDI over the last few years, and we expect much more to be done in the coming years. We also manage the New Frontiers in Research Fund, and some of you may have applied to that. We introduced there for the first time a requirement for applicants to indicate two things related to EDI. One was how their research may be impacted or may impact EDI considerations. And the second was to demonstrate how their teams would either are or will be responsive to EDI requirements in terms of diversity. That was 2 paragraphs. It was interesting, the first year, a lot of applicants ignored that. Some provided answers that weren't very good, and those applications, for the first time, that did not address the question sufficiently were removed from the competition. And that set off, a lot of howls among some of the peer reviewers and among the applicants. But, we certainly advertised that well before the fact. Since that time, in year 2 now and going into year 3, this has been addressed and everybody understands what this means, and I think pay a lot of attention to that. So within the councils, as you know, SSHRC has been certainly working hard on issues related to equity, diversity, and inclusion for a long time. With respect to gender, the numbers of applicants and the numbers of successful applicants among women has always exceeded that for men in terms of gender, which is quite encouraging at this time. So more than 50% of applicants are women, and in terms of success rate, certainly equivalent or higher than for other candidates. Where we quite frankly need to do more work is in areas related particularly to visible minorities and persons with disabilities. In indigenous research, I think we've also done well in terms of policies we've had in place for some time on Indigenous research. We spend each year more than 10% of our budget, 10%, sometimes 12 and even higher on Indigenous related projects. And that's far higher than any other agency and certainly significantly higher than the proportion of Indigenous persons in the population. But this is not our goal. Our goal is to support good research, and we've done that, I think, and we're going to do more. Now, as you know, we have, with the other agencies, introduced an initial, I won't call it screening tool, but information sheet asking applicants for information on their own personal background, should they wish to respond to these. And we get very high response rates, over 90%, 95%. And we're now starting to collect data on not just the designated groups, but far beyond that into categories of identity that are recognized by Statistics Canada. So we've had, I believe just now, 2 years of that data, and we're starting to analyze some of those results in terms of application rates from specific groups based upon their representation in the population, and of course success rates. The initial indications show that in terms of success rates, not much difference from general population or across groups. Submission rates is another issue, another challenge we see in some respects, as individuals, for example, in the case of disability, may not always be willing to disclose that, and this is important, at least for the work we're doing, or members of visible minorities have not always indicated this. So the more people are comfortable with the tool, it doesn't go into the peer review process at this point, but it will help us understand where those inequities are. So what will the next steps be? If we feel that, as NSERC has done, it's important to do that for insight or insight development, then obviously that's something that we'll need to discuss, and certainly we'll be bringing to leaders to discuss. But at this point, we really want to take the time and understand the data. I think you can understand why NSERC would want to move more quickly on this, just given some of the historical tendencies there that we've been fortunate to have managed, at least at some level, to this point, particularly around gender.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, for asking the first question and kicking this off for us. Darcy, if you'd like to change Dr. Allen's status, I'm going to move over to the first email question I received, and that was from Liam Swiss. He wrote to say that Memorial and other universities across Canada are increasingly reliant on recruiting international graduate students who often pay more than double the fees and tuition of Canadian students. When they begin their program here, many are very disappointed to learn that they are ineligible for the big ticket graduate funding opportunities at SSHRC, and Memorial only has limited internal funding to reward high performing students. If the future of Canadian graduate enrollments lies in internationalization, then it seems only fitting that international students are eligible to compete against the best Canadian students in the SSHRC programs. Will SSHRC consider revising its eligibility for the MA, CGS, and doctoral fellowships to address the growing importance of international graduate student enrollments at Memorial and across the country?
The short answer, if the question is, will we consider that, the short answer is yes. And in fact, now that is being discussed by the Tri-Council and also in the context of the Canada Research Coordinating Committee. It's always a challenge, as you know, because there are many students, parents of students who in Canada, who believe they pay taxes and aren't necessarily all that thrilled when they find out, the percentage of students being funded, at a certain level, master's, doctoral level, are X, when in fact, their own prospects they see as being diminished, or the prospects for their children are being diminished as a result. So we need to kind of take that into account. But we would like to see, and we're already looking at programs like the Banting programs and the Vianne program, which is open to applicants from outside Canada now. We'd like to do the same thing with the Canada Graduate Scholarships at both levels, and that is to make international students eligible at the time of application, so they would know before they arrive. That's under discussion, and also something we might want to be talking about more at the leaders' meetings, and certainly confer with the community on what the right balance should be, or should it be completely open, or should we maintain some restrictions and so forth.
Thank you. The next question from Arne Keeling is in a similar vein. SSHRC funding levels for scholarship funding for MA and PhD students have remained roughly the same for at least a decade. Given the strategic plan goal of growing Canada's research talent, how does SSHRC intend to address student funding shortfalls?
So it's a really interesting question, right? And it's very obvious, because I got a SSHRC doctoral fellowship, I'm going to just lay it on the table, in 1980, and it was $17,000. I thought I'd won the lottery. I was making more than people who were working for an hourly wage, right? Like, it was awful. Well, it's not much more now, as you know, and that certainly inflation is not accounted, it hasn't accounted for inflation at all. So that's always an issue. So the challenge is, as the system has grown, do we try and provide more money to fewer students, or do we try and support as many students as we can to support the work that they do? This also interacts, and I'm being very, very transparent here. It also interacts with what occurs at the provincial level and provincial responsibilities for supporting education, particularly, and students. So we want to make sure that our role in this strictly adheres to our constitutional obligations to fund research and provide research support as compared to the provincial responsibilities for education and training. So these are all things that are, again, under discussion, along with the issue of funding for international students. And at very least, we want to make sure that the amounts are the same across the councils, which they're not right now, and across the CGS and the council-based applications. So these are the challenges that we're facing with respect to that, but we've committed to undertake that discussion as part of a larger review of talent, of funding for what we call talent, and particularly at the master's and doctoral level.
Great, thank you. And I just want to remind our audience that you can submit your questions using the Q&A function, and we'd love to see you on screen. So just let me know if you'd like to pop on screen, and we're happy to make that happen. The next question I have is from Matthew Milner. He says, SSHRC's existing programs aren't always well suited for disciplines that lean towards archival or repository-centered research, and SSHRC does not see the funding of archives and repositories, which are themselves the oldest form we have of open access for research data, as part of its remit. How is SSHRC supporting archives and repositories in light of its commitments to EDI, open access, and data management?
So that's a really good question. I'm waiting for some lobbers. If you have a few easy ones coming up, that would be great. Just give me a chance to catch my breath. So with respect to that, it's true that a facility or an institute or repository itself would not be eligible for funding. On the other hand, and we can certainly check this, under the and I've certainly seen this, for folks who have applied for insight grants, up to $400,000 for partnership development and partnership grants, they have developed their own repositories and facilities, with that funding, which, as I understand it, is eligible under that grant funding. That may not be enough to provide sustainability, but then again, it certainly would help to move forward with those plans and to set up these particular initiatives. On the other hand, there are other options to some extent, depending on CFI eligibility rules, working with CFI. I know, for example, that the Canada Research Chairs Program has a CFI grant component. If there's an interest in as part of that establishment of the CRC, establishing some form of repository or other type of facility that may be eligible under CFI, so that's worth checking as well. And beyond that, it becomes a question of how perhaps the university may wish to use its SSHRC institutional funds to support some of that activity. But here again, and here's the challenge, in that when we fund journals, we're funding publication of some books, we fund researchers, we fund students. Our budgets, even though they have increased, are fairly fixed. So, if we move to fund one segment of the research enterprise, then that takes funding away from another segment of the enterprise. And so that's always something we have to keep in mind, whenever we're looking at new or novel or funding particular research needs of our existing cohort of researchers. So I hope that helps. I mean, it's something we've talked about with respect to big repositories and big collections with CFI, and working with networks like CRKN and so forth to try and make sure that these things can be well supported through one means or another. The research data centers, for another really good example, we do provide funding for those with CIHR in conjunction with Statistics Canada. But I think, the question really involves things that would be somewhat more modest undertakings than that. And yes, that's worth a conversation with the VP Research. It's worth a conversation with SSHRC and CFI and the institution to see if there are ways that can be better supported.
We've actually had Matthew Milner speak up in the chat asking if he can follow up. So I'm going to ask Darcy if he can bring Matthew on screen. We have a few other questions that are coming in, so I'm going to ask you to please try and keep the exchange a little bit brief, just so that we can respect the other folks who have questions they want to ask. Matthew, in a second, you should see the ability to, there you go, turn on your camera. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I realize it was a bit of a long question, but I think your comment about sustainability really kind of hits the nail on the head. We see that there's the Aid to Scholarly Journals program, that really helps journals get published. And I'm just kind of wondering if there's anything like that. There used to be aid to small universities that would kind of help out with these infrastructure questions. I guess the reliance on CFI that I see is that that's still all driven by a research question.
Yeah.
And we have lots of researchers in specific disciplines whose methodologies really mean, let's go to an archive, or let's use an existing collection rather than building one, as well as the component, as you say, is building a collection. But then, where does it go when it's done, right? It's that sustainability bit. And I'm just kind of wondering how equitable that is in light of these open access commitments and this research data commitments that SSHRC is developing, when people produce stuff and there's nowhere for it to go, or there's the assumption that it's up to the institution to kind of catch the bucket, as it were.
So, I mean, you're right, Matthew, and I certainly get the point. And it's not just in our areas. I mean, even in big science, it's the same question. How do you support these big science facilities once they're built? And this is a question for government. For us, what we've tried to do is to work with partners and institutions to try and find ways to support these. But you are absolutely correct. that in terms of our funding and the sort of philosophy at SSHRC is we're funding projects, and projects will have a life. And longer term things like repositories and libraries, create challenges for all of us. There is a SSHRC institutional grant. Memorial, I don't think would be eligible for the aid to small universities. It's too big and powerful. So that's not available. There is an institutional grant of some size, but still, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands, not millions. So I can't. I think in Canada generally, I'm going to say we're great at getting stuff going. We have very good project funding, but sometimes not so good at keeping things open and surviving in that context. And as I said, that's where we've had to work with institutional partners. There are funds, for example, for the indirect costs of research, the research support fund that flow to the university as well. I know that some of those funds are used to maintain facilities and or of the type that you're describing. That's another option to discuss with Neil. I know also those funds are probably well oversubscribed at Memorial as they are everywhere else. So it's something, I'm happy to continue talking about. Certainly talk to Tana, your SSHRC leader, get that raised on the floor at our meetings. And we can have further conversation about what we might try to do to sort that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Darcy, you can change his status. And I have some more questions that have come in the chat. So I'm going to go now to ask a question from Lisa Charlong. She sits on the Newfoundland Coalition of Persons with Disabilities board, and they've been discussing research related to EDI issues at their meetings. Research administrative staff, she says, including grant funding officers, actively support and offer workshops and sessions that encourage faculty to submit successful SSHRC applications. In your opinion, what can we do here to increase the number of applications from persons with disabilities?
That's a very good question. I mean, in some respects, it would fall into line generally with the question about how to encourage good applications from colleagues generally. In the case of persons with disabilities, certainly, they would have special needs under our program funding. Those are or would be eligible. We're also reviewing currently what precisely we're saying publicly with respect to the kinds of supports that we can provide through the research should they be successful. If you're talking about the application stage, and maybe Vianne or Neil, you might want to talk about this. I'm quite certain that within the context of the university, supports would be provided with respect to development of proposals, mentoring, and or review, that would assist with that as well. But once it's funded, many costs that would be associated with particular disabilities would be eligible to be funded under the grant. So assistance with transcription, for example, or mobility issues that would carry higher costs and so forth. It's something I'm happy to say we're looking at much more carefully now, and we've been certainly in communication with national representative groups around this particular issue. The pandemic has brought this to light critically, in the last little while as well. So it is a topic of current discussion as well.
Dr. Bose, did you want to add anything to that answer?
I can add that we have put in place one person centrally who's working with what we call our grant facilitation officers right across the institution to work with researchers to essentially up our game in terms of quality of applications and to provide information that is generic to many applications and guidance from someone who's had experience with multiple applications. So we do have that in place. We'd like to expand that. We're limited by resources, but we have found it to be very well worthwhile right across the tri-agencies. And our focus with this approach is with the tri-agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Bose, did you have a question that you'd like to ask Dr. Hewitt since we're on you now?
Mainly, Dr. Hewitt, I wondered if you could oversight some of the programs, especially that are related to multiple partners, especially industry partners that are relevant to the SSHRC field.
Yeah, for sure. And I know in the past, there have been many successful partnership projects at Memorial. I've had the pleasure of, certainly reviewing some of that work and talking with principal investigators. And I know how important that is in the context of where you are and the work you do locally and the kind of in partnership with government, with industry, with the not-for-profit sector. So we have a suite of programs. Well, first of all, I might say, through any program that you wish, insight development, insight, or others, we would encourage, if it's relevant, the inclusion of partners. In fact, in insight development, you can have co-applicants who are outside the country, in effect, in terms of international collaboration, and they can be funded. We do have targeted, and industry certainly would fall in that category. We've had insight applications or insight development where people are working together with industrial partners on various projects. Whether this would be, industries that are supporting some community-based activity, or there are particular issues that might benefit the work that they do. The specific suite of programming that we use for that is the partnership program, which contains 3 elements, a partnership engage grant, a partnership development grant, and a partnership grant. So all ranging from relatively low amounts to, amounts in the hundreds of thousands to the millions. We have, through that program, attracted probably 1,000 or more industry partners at any time. So we know, everything from, Fountain Tire. Don't ask me what they're doing with their partners out west, but Fountain Tire, I know, has been on the list, to companies, that you may see as more, linked to social science, humanities research. So, for example, in screening, HR types of areas and so forth, or community development. So they're there for that. They operate, in the same rules as anyone else. The only thing is we can't fund them directly. It's not in our mandate to fund industry directly. However, they can certainly benefit from projects. And in fact, under the partnership mode, projects are to be developed in ways that do benefit their partners, or in fact, they're likely to fail in peer review. So those opportunities are there. So I would just say, even though you may think of partners, typically as being not-for-profits or community groups and so forth, industry is and has been there. We've had partnership with software developers, as I say, and a whole host of different players. So whatever you can imagine, and then talk to us. We have Eric Bastien or Wafa Bitar, are just really great. They've been there for a long time. They know that program inside and out. They'd be happy to talk to you about how to structure that. But, we would welcome that activity.
Our next question came in through the chat. It's from Rochelle Cote, and she says, open source requirements for data are at odds with Indigenous ownership and control over data. I'm wondering what conversations are being had to try and work within this changing landscape so that researchers can meet obligations to communities and to SSHRC. That is,
a really good question, and something I've been made aware of for some time now in conversations with particular colleagues at ITK and Natano Bed, who represents, a large portion of Canada's Inuit community, where we have policies in certainly at SSHRC encouraging open access, and this is conflicting directly with the desire on the part of Indigenous communities to control use of data and information that we also support, that are contained within our own policies and our own funding programming. So what I would say in the short term is certainly those two things can exist concurrently with respect to projects we fund. And we certainly recognize, first and foremost, the need for all Indigenous research to involve directly and primarily and without question, Indigenous researchers and Indigenous communities, and preferably in the lead. And we also recognize that the products of that research are, and what it's to be used for, are wholly within the scope and the rights of those community groups. So that I would claim at this point, until we find a more elegant, way to manage this, I would claim at this point that those concerns would certainly supersede anything that might be written or enforced around open access, more open access preferences or issues or challenges more generally. This is a big discussion, and I can tell you that within government, there are a lot of folks who don't understand this question, and we've been instrumental in certainly explaining that to government, who've been quite adamant about the need for open access, and we've been quite active in explaining how that will conflict with what we're saying with respect to the rights of Indigenous communities to manage and control the use of their own data. So there'll be lots more to say about that. It's also going to be it has been, and will be a primary point of discussion in the policy work that we do through the Setting New Directions strategy that we develop conjointly with our Indigenous partners.
Thank you. I want to let folks know we have probably about 15 minutes left to take questions. So if you have something that you'd like to ask, please submit it now. Our next question comes from Nicholas Welsh. He says, following up on Matt's question, beyond archives and repositories, other research projects often have continuing maintenance costs as well. Are these costs eligible for any existing SSHRC grants, or can they be built into the application from the outset?
The short answer is no. They can be anticipated in the project grant. And again, this is not a SSHRC issue. This extends over to NSERC and to CIHR. I think one has to be very careful, and I admit this, in terms of how research proposals are constructed. So for example, if you've successfully received Insight grant funding, and you're able to develop something that will be useful for researchers and needs to be supported beyond that in your view, then maybe it's time to start thinking about a research development grant or a partnership development grant or a partnership grant in order to extend that funding well beyond, or through the suite of programming we offer now through the New Frontiers Fund. So that will require some planning, but there's nothing right now, and I would say across the agencies, that would support the maintenance of that activity within the funding suite that we have. And that's true even of the big, expensive science facilities that we see across Canada, and that's a major challenge there. In the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that government is just really trying to come to grips with now. Of course, the institution sometimes will pick up these costs. They can be supported through research support funds or other sources as well. Should the institution, be convinced that it's critical for the use of faculty at Memorial and so forth. Here again, happy to have the conversation. Program officers could help in terms of the structuring of grants to try and ensure that you're positioned, to reapply down the road to affect continuity. But that's probably a discussion that we should have specifically related to the project you have in mind.
Next question just came in from Heather O'Brien. She said, the last SSHRC institutional grant was offered in 2017, which allowed Memorial to offer Explore and Exchange grants. Will SSHRC be offering the SIG again soon to support projects that need less than $7,000 in funding?
Yeah, well, the SIG is a continuing program. So, and my understanding is these are annual disbursements, so there shouldn't be any issue with that. And I'm just so delighted, that you're offering those particular grants in that way, because we wanted to make sure they were well identified with SSHRC. And that researchers, when they put on their CV, don't just put, like internal grant or something. They can now give them a name, and they have been hopefully merit reviewed at some level. And that will give them more visibility. And then through your reporting, we'll be able to inform government, of the true percentage of faculty we support through those mechanisms. But that's an ongoing program. There may be delays as they make changes or introduce changes to the program, but that's an annual disbursement.
Lisa Charlong has a related EDI question. She said, across Canada in SSHRC and in CRC EDI stats, do numbers reflect or include non-visible disabilities? Support for these disabilities and disclosing them often shifts numbers considerably.
Yes, so they are, and they are public. Darlene, we're going to check that, but we've had 2 years of data now from applicants, and we're starting to share that data more widely as we also analyze it for our own purposes. I can say, and we saw this in the Canada Research Chairs program, that the question is spot on in terms of encouraging folks to come forward and to self-identify, because quite often that doesn't happen. And we're left with numbers that may underreport the actual extent to which people are having problems as a result of disabilities. So we really want to start to change that, and through this reporting and through the CRC reporting, we hope that will happen.
Next question is from Heather O'Brien. She says, I welcome the addition of a co-director to the 2021 PG Stage 1 application. Is SSHRC planning on extending this to other programs, for example, allowing co-principal investigators?
I could be wrong, but my understanding is that discussion had begun, so that's something we're going to have to follow up on as well in order to provide you with the best answer for that. But I think personally, I think it's a good idea. My understanding is those discussions, were underway. I just don't know what stage they're at, so we'll find that out for sure.
And Matthew Milner is saying that SSHRC is revising its portals. When will the new portals be released? Is the CCV going to be used for IEGs in 2022?
I'm laughing because, it took quite a while to get that one out. The CCV has been in place for some time. Just as SSHRC manages the Canada Research Chairs program and the Canada First Research Excellence Fund and all manner of things, CIHR manages the CCV. We use CCV for some of our programs, not for others. For lots of different reasons, as we have this sort of bifurcated structure of equipment and infrastructure that has not allowed for the effective integration of all this at one time. Now we have the solution in development for all 3 councils, so we'll have one system. You'll be able to apply to the same uniform system with the same format across CIHR, SSHRC, and NSERC. We elected, instead of trying to fix the CCV, which everybody knows needs a lot of fixing, we elected to undertake the revision of the CCV within the context of this new programming. Things are moving along very well. We're talking to vendors. We've done some consultation with community. We'll be doing more of that. My fondest hope is that we're going to be ready to move with the new system and for application within 2 years. But I also know how challenging this is, and I think you at your own institution, if you've moved to new systems like PeopleSoft, you know how challenging it is. So it's coming. We're moving as fast as we can. We're happy with the progress. We also have to operate under constraints you will not have at Memorial, and that relates to government requirements in terms of funding, investment, selection of vendors, and so forth, which tends also to kind of keep things from moving at the fullest or quickest possible pace. It's coming.
Thank you very much. And that's all the questions that I've received in the Q&A function. So I'm going to ask Dr. Timmons if she has a question that she'd like to ask of Dr. Hewitt.
Of course, I have lots of questions, but
all right.
I wanted to give the audience one. I'm going to ask 2 quick ones. One is, we've been really getting a lot of government pressure here on the whole tech sector. And I'm wondering if SSHRC is looking at any programs that will facilitate research to help understand the impact of the tech investments.
So that's a really good question, and the approach, first of all, we're funding, this is only limited to applicants' imaginations in terms of what they'd like to do, even with tech partners, through our programming, as I was mentioning to Neil. Corporately, we're keenly interested in a couple of areas that we're now moving on with partners to explore a bit more. One is AI, as you would guess, because of the obvious social impacts on that. We feel, we're kind of, behind the wave on that a bit because the technology got out ahead of our capacity really to understand how well people would adopt. And we're already seeing some resistance to certain things and certain processes. So we certainly fund that. We want to talk about that. We're engaged in conversation on that. I've written op-eds about that particular issue. We got to remember, people are the inventors and they're the adopters. And if they don't adopt, you have a big problem. We all have a big problem. So where we are trying to get out ahead now is in quantum and quantum technologies. So we are now talking with the technical quantum folks across Canada. We're looking to bring together a group for an event later this year, but we're bringing in partners. So instead of just particular universities, we are now engaged in discussions with the Bank of Canada, because we feel, and they feel, that the first quantum applications will come in the area of financial security and banking. So we want to understand what that means. If your bank tells you they're using some quantum security measure, is that going to make you feel safe or less safe? What's going to happen if some critical system fails because of something called quantum? You can well imagine. So we want to get way out ahead of that. So you'll probably see KSGs, and I know some of you have applied for those, which is great, at Memorial, to maybe explore some of that with the bank or on our own. That's the sort of understanding where we're going piece and state-of-the-art information. But I think, Vianne, the bottom line is, certainly, these are all areas that would be eligible for application. And one thing I got to squeeze in here is that we are about to trial next year a new program that would allow researchers who are working across the councils to apply to their regular research funding opportunity, to tick a box saying, inherently cross-council. Those will be pulled and adjudicated separately and funded as appropriate. So that lets you get out of the disciplinary box more easily. And we're going to be announcing that, I think, this spring, and we're really, really pleased that this has finally come to fruition.
So the last question I have is on my mind every single day. I see the impact of the pandemic on our community, on our researchers, on our students. Has SSHRC done an analysis of the impact of the pandemic on research applicants? Are the numbers up, down, or are you finding the gender balance skewing? I'm really curious about that.
So it's only been, I would say, the evidence that we have stems, first of all, from special competitions that we launched, because the spring, we couldn't really say much from the spring numbers because that was from the previous fall. So we launched special competitions on COVID through the Partnership Engage grants. We had 250 applications. That was like way, way, way more than we would get on a quarterly competition. We funded 111. So we thought, okay, lots of pressure. People are interested, and on all sorts of things related to COVID. For the fall, the numbers for Insight Grant actually went down quite a bit. So the pressure was reduced. That's good if you applied, because it probably means your chance of being funded have now gone up quite a bit. But we're just in process of analyzing now what the root causes of that were. We'll be analyzing success rates as well, obviously, when we're completed with the competition. And we're just now moving into partnership and site development. So that's going to be further down the road. Insight's going to tell us a lot in terms of who applied. My initial understanding is that it was still pretty much SSHRC standard, women and men. I don't have the data, for the other designated groups, but it was pretty steady. The issue will be who submitted what and who got funded. If we see some significant issues there, we may have to contemplate some kind of mechanism or otherwise. I don't know what that would be on future funding to maybe help address that. Otherwise, we're gathering data from everywhere. We have global, we have a frontier study that was done globally on researchers. We have regional and institutional studies. We have anecdotal data. It's all being gathered by the Canada Research Coordinating Committee now to see whether or not there's room for us to consider perhaps a special call or a rapid response call to address some of that in the short term. So it's something, it's very top of mind for all of us. I mean, it's going to affect how we operate, for the next months and potentially years, and how we assess proposals. But I think we have to keep very, very close eye on that.
Thank you for that. Back to you, Megan.
Great, and we have one last question here from Heather O'Brien, but first she said, thank you for your detailed and specific answers so far. We really appreciate you being with us today. And her question,
thank you for joining.
Her question was that international researchers are not allowed to be co-applicants on IGs, but are allowed on IDGs.
Right.
Will SSHRC consider allowing international CIs on IG to help increase international research collaborations?
That is my fondest hope. We run an agency where we make changes based on evidence and input and consultation from the community, but I have spoken to the VP Research, Dominique Bervet, about this. I hear this a lot. I've always been in favor of this. I mean, in the order of priorities, we haven't quite got there, but all of our other programs are open. Most of them, I think virtually all other than Insight, all the partnership programs are open to international co-applicants. Insight development is open. So why not Insight? And what are we waiting for? So I'm there with you. One thing I did do that I managed to get done is for the New Frontiers programming, every single one of those competitions is open to international co-applicants, every single one, and therefore eligible for funding, and the government wholeheartedly agreed with that move. So I would just, keep saying what you're saying, give me the support I need to be able to go back, and once again, there'll be a report from this meeting that Darlene and I will prepare, we'll distribute to the VPs, and once again, we're going to say, we should really move on this, and what are the issues, but I think, certainly there are discussions behind the scenes. Maybe we can push those along a little bit.
Thank you. And that's it for questions and just about it for time. So I'm going to say thank you to our panelists and ask Dr. Timmons if she'd like to conclude the event for us.
I would love to. Thank you, Megan, for an amazing job moderating. Wonderful. Good job. I think you've been moderating all our town halls, and you're getting to become quite, well, you were skilled from the very first moment you started. Thank you very much, Dr. Bose, and a special thank you to you, Ted, and to SSHRC. This has been a great opportunity to hear from our research community, a wonderful conversation, and we need to keep this conversation going. So reach out if you have any ideas. I know that the VP Research would be interested. I know that that SSHRC is interested. Again, I'm learning with you as I join you in these town halls. I learn more about the research culture situation at Memorial and the challenges you face. So thank you for a great learning hour. Thank you, Megan.
And thank you. It's been great.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Hope to see you soon.
Stay safe.
In
Stay
St.
safe.
John's.